Hi everyone. I'm a massive fan of spoke trousers, so this is even more exciting to me than talking about a DC brand going to TV, which is also very exciting. I think most of you reading the headlines in the industry press and national press think that TV's dead. TV's not dead. So I'm going to talk to Ben about Spoke's journey, how he's built his brand, and the role of TV advertising. So Ben, do you want to kick off telling us a bit about how you've built the brand, how you built Spoke using different marketing channels?
Yeah, so I think in the first instance, we were a pretty, what I guess you'd now regard as conventional direct-to-consumer brand. Digitally native and focused in the early years on, well, the usual suite of digital channels. 10 years ago, you could definitely make money quite quickly on Facebook. I still think it's a brilliant tool for getting from £0 to £10 million. And we went on that journey on Facebook and Google, obviously. Latterly, that takes the form of a lot of TikTok too. And it's probably worth mentioning that some old school direct response works as well. So we did, we plowed a rich seam of catalogs for a while, still do for our existing customer list. And that all worked tremendously well until it didn't. So I think we have lived the experience that many people talk about, where you're able to scale very fast, and eventually you arrive at a point where there just aren't enough people in market for your products at any moment in time. Your budgets have got bigger, the segments you're targeting are saturating, and of course your cost of customer acquisition saturates, and at that moment you have to start thinking seriously about building future demand, building brand at the top of the funnel. And so that's the crossroads we reached probably 3 or 4 years ago now, maybe 5. And so I suppose the story of the last 4 or 5 years has been one of diversifying the marketing mix to a place where we are paying much more attention to the top of the funnel, and that's the background to the decision to invest in TV.
What were the most successful channels when you were building the brand? You talked about direct mail, talked catalogs, Facebook and TikTok. And what works best, and how did you evaluate them as you grew?
Well, as a digitally native direct-to-consumer brand, we were incredibly numbers-driven. And so, if you ask me what works best, I'd probably tell you, any of those channels that give me immediate validation and feedback, and the opportunity to optimize. That's actually, in the early stages, an incredibly exciting journey to go on. The first time you get the flywheel working on Facebook, and you realize that you can acquire a customer for less than perhaps they make for you on their very first purchase, that's a really exciting place to be. So in the first 3 or 4 years, we just rode that wave. And it has to be said that, this is 10 years ago when it was easier to achieve that on Facebook. Yeah. And it got us to decent scale. There are tens of thousands of customers relatively quickly. But I suppose the story here is that changes over time as you saturate, as you get bigger, as your budgets get bigger, and of course your targets go up. Doubling every year becomes progressively harder, quite obviously. And there just aren't enough eyeballs on Facebook to keep that flywheel going. So you have to find new ways.
So you moved into TV. Tell us about the light bulb moment when you thought you'll move in. Because for a D2C brand, it must be quite scary. TV is for massive, big global brands, not for D2C brands.
Yeah, I mean, I'd done enough. I felt sort of plugged in enough to the marketing discussion to realize that it wasn't completely rogue for a brand of our size to think about TV. In fact, quite the reverse. It's probably something that should be on our radar. But that doesn't mean that, as you say, it's an incredibly intimidating thing to do. If you grow up on Facebook, you are utterly conditioned to expect that immediate validation that you get from the measurement tools that are available to you on Ad Manager. And the idea of suddenly writing enormous checks of an order of magnitude that you've never encountered before, without that validation, it's obviously intimidating. In the first instance, we tried to deal with that by treating TV as if it were a performance channel. So we made a direct response ad, and we made our best attempt to measure the impact of that and calculate a CAC that we could believe. Now, of course, that's not straightforward, and most people in the room, I'm sure, will be hugely familiar with the challenges of attribution. How do you calculate a CAC for a TV ad? There is no good answer to that question. But we tried, And even under the most generous attribution we could manage, we were looking at a CAC that was about double what we were spending in our normal digital channels. So something that was very difficult to justify scaling. And in the meantime, a couple of things had happened. First of all, we put together creative copy that was built for a direct response. And that comes at a cost in terms of brand equity and brand building. You know, whenever you try to shove something down somebody's throat and say, buy this thing now, you are not doing the same job as you might be if you were trying to make them feel something about your brand and remember it. So there was that cost. And then there's also the challenge you have. When you try and measure TV, what I've seen a bunch of other brands do, and I certainly think we were guilty of, was being chased to the dark corners of the schedule. You end up trying to manage for CAC by managing the denominator, which is to say finding the cheapest remnant inventory you can at 3 a.m. on the Discovery Channel. And you only need a couple of conversions for that to feel pretty good and to deliver some metrics that you quite like. But it's not doing much for your brand to be caught there. And actually, in aggregate, the absolute number of people that you can ever acquire through that sort of schedule chasing is actually not very exciting at all. So eventually, we convinced ourselves to be braver than that and to make a brand ad on the understanding that it'd be much harder to measure. To take a leap of faith and build something that we thought would build brand salience and brand equity, and let that play out in our existing channels, in our existing digital channels. So actually the place that I reap the benefit of advertising on TV is, well, the same old channels that I've always converted customers in the last mile, which is, say, Facebook and Instagram and Google. But yes, eventually we summoned the courage to give that a crack rather than traditional DRTV. And I suppose the secret sauce there, or the thing I inevitably have to talk about at this point, is our media for equity deal with ITV. I mean, it makes a massive difference if you're not trading cold, hard cash for airtime. And I think that gave us the confidence to close our eyes, take the leap. Of course, none of this is to say that we've given up on measurements and that we don't care and we just trust and it's all blind faith. It's just the measurements lag. They just take a while to build. And so we diligently measure the marketing funnel, and we're incredibly pleased with the way that's changed. So to give you a sense of that, our aided awareness over the 3 years that we've been advertising on ITV has more or less tripled. Okay. And that's nationwide, despite the fact that we've actually been focused on just a couple of regions in ITV's network. Prior to that, we would see aided awareness creep up by basis points every 6 months, and suddenly there was this enormous leap forward. Yeah. So if you believe in the funnel, if you believe that aided awareness will drive consideration, eventually trial, and eventually repeat business, then that sort of leap forward in aided awareness is really exciting. And we think it's played out in our ability to scale through those channels that I mentioned at the outset. So I think relative to our peers, we've been able to put away vastly more spend on Facebook and Instagram and Google and TikTok over the past few years, as a function of the fact that we've been building all that future demand at the top of the funnel.
How do you tell me about how you took that leap of faith? Because that seems such an easy phrase to say, but it's quite a scary move. And many people in this room are kind of, I would say, hooked to the drug of performance. But it is a drug. As you say, you put some money, you get results instantly back. So how did you make that leap of faith?
It's a bit like the way I describe why did I start a business. It's because I was out of fear of what I might feel if I didn't try. It's, I'd seen this story play out in so many D2C brands. I felt like a lot of the D2C brands that I was watching in America were 3 to 5 years ahead of us on the curve, and there were worrying signs that you will tap out if you remain wedded to Mark Zuckerberg. And I felt while of course, as I say, this conditioning to expect immediate validation, immediate measurement, and immediate results is very difficult to overcome. If you spend long enough staring at the abyss and the possibility that your CAC is just going to spiral out of control and there are no more customers coming your way, then it will force your hand. And look, as I say, there's no doubt that the media for equity deal that we came across helped grease the wheels and make it easier. But I'm now a proper evangelist for this and trying to persuade some brands for whom perhaps media for equity isn't available to likewise take the leap and part even with cash.
Let's talk a bit about the creative journey of your TV ads, because they were, I would say, the first and the third are quite different. So talk a bit about how you developed that creative approach to TV advertising.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to say is, it's elite, right? You've got a team that has built muscle and conditioning for launching 11-second Facebook ads with a, massive, great smack you between the eyes, hook at the start, and a big call to action at the end. And suddenly you're confronted with the prospect of making a 30-second spot that hits slightly different. And so it's not straightforward figuring out that creative. And it's worth saying that in every case, we've retained the services of, obviously, of an agency and of quite big agencies, bigger agencies than we would ordinarily work with, in a bid to underwrite the risk of making this very big change in the kind of creative that we were outputting. In the first instance, the first ad that we made, as I say, had a really direct response character. So sort of fairly direct description of what Spoke does, an end card that said buy this thing now, and even a discount code, which I think is the real flag that you want somebody desperately to do something right away. And I'm not, I'm definitely not ashamed of that ad. I think it's still got tone. It's not completely divorced from the brand, but it definitely has that character. And it is perhaps a little cheapened as a consequence. So the brief for the second ad that we made 2 or 3 years later was consistent with all of the thinking that I've already shared, which is to say, let's make a brand ad, let's build some brand equity, let's make something memorable that make people feel something about this menswear brand that they may never have come across before. And that was probably our dominant goal going into that brief. I think we met that goal. I think it might have come, I still love that ad, we might even watch it, but I think it might have come at the cost of a little bit of salience in terms of the kind of the presence of the brand on screen. And the other major challenge we had with that ad was that it had a really strong narrative arc. Again, this might be better if we look at it, but made it very difficult to cut down. And I think if you're going to spend an enormous portion of your budget on creative and media, which is what you end up doing in relative terms on TV, you have to make sure that it's going to work hard for you in a range of different contexts. If you've got a TV ad that only really works as a 30-second spot, you've really done yourself a disservice, and that's where we felt we landed on that second ad. It was very difficult to cut and to edit the narrative arc in a way that allowed it. Right. You want something that works for pre-roll on YouTube or an 11-second Facebook ad. And we found it really difficult to work with this ad on that basis, which meant that it kind of got orphaned. It felt like, it did its job. God knows those awareness numbers that I shared earlier, they're real. And it was a dramatic uptick. And there's very little that I regret about the process that we went through. But certainly in terms of making a third ad, we focused on trying to create something that had fractionally more salience, which is a long word to say, just make the brand more visible. And make sure that it's something that we could chop up and use in lots of different contexts. Something that would even carry into other media. We've got against the current campaign, we've got an outdoor campaign that works really well, which is very difficult to achieve with the second ad.
So what was it like, just in terms of working with a big agency? It must have been such a different experience, especially, as you say, this massive amount of money you're spending on this. How did you get over the I guess, sort of cultural shock of that compared to running performance ads, Facebook ads?
I'm not sure I ever did. I think, on shoot day, you sort of stand there and you look around at the 60-odd people that seem to have appeared. And have this awful, sinking thought, I'm paying for everybody, everybody that's here. And so, the step change, the order of magnitude difference in budget and the speed with which you put it away when you engage with a process like this is something I can't claim to have become completely accustomed to at any stage. But in terms of, getting over the line, getting to the point where I was willing to press ahead, well, if I'm honest, I'm sure we'd made the decision to commit to TV before we found an agency, but my ability to feel confidence, to feel comfortable with the process was definitely predicated on great agency selection, feeling really good about the people, running a proper process and feeling really good about the people that we were working with. Definitely running across some people that with whom I didn't think it would work through that process, and in many ways that maybe when I found the one, lent confidence to the whole process that made it a lot easier. But as I say, I can't pretend that even through the end of it, you can get completely comfortable with that rate of spend.
It does sound terrifying. So what's the future? As you say, you had that great deal with ITV. future may involve that cold hard cash, which we're terrified. So what's the future for TV for the Spoke brand?
Yeah, I mean, we're sold, right? Like, I believe. I buy the marketing theory. I've read my long and the short of it, and Mark Ritson's probably here somewhere, and I've done my mini MBA. I've done tons of reading, and I've always been sold on the top line theory of all of this. But now it's backed by the ballast of some real numbers that we've directly observed. I know there's no bullshit. We've done the measurement ourselves. And so, yes, I'd probably cast myself as a true believer in that sense. Okay. And on that basis, we'll be putting cash behind this in the future. So our Media for Equity deal is coming to an end in the not too distant future. And I can certainly see us writing checks. I think about that quite broadly, obviously in the sense that I'd look at different channels. I think there are new audiences to look at for Spoke, especially after 3 years of playing the same one. And I think we also, we group a lot of above the line in the same space. So we definitely consider, a big outdoor campaign, and probably find ourselves trading that off against TV spend at the top of the funnel. But yeah, certainly sold on the idea that investment at that level is important if you want to continue growing a direct-to-consumer brand.
What do you think? There's often lots of talk about how all marketing is now performance marketing, and especially TV has become performance. You can add a QR code to it with CTV. You can do sort of direct response, etc. And you talked about how your first forays into TV were sort of direct response based, and then you realised, or you realised the branding was the way to go. So what's your view on the evolution of the TV into performance medium via those kind of mechanisms? Or do you think it should be seen as a TV as old, a big brand?
I don't think I'm plugged in enough to crystal ball gaze and tell you what's coming. I mean, of course, like the algorithms get ever smarter. So when you talk about something like connected TV, is it possible that at some stage that evolves to the point where it's so insanely good at finding somebody who will respond to your ads that it makes money? Yeah, maybe that's in our future. Although I imagine it'll work like any other digital marketing auction, and the price we bid up to the point where actually it's marginally loss-making. So maybe not. Our experience of things like connected TV to date and the DRTV campaign that we run and the heavy sweating of TV Squared and the rest of it was that the minute you tried to optimize and get narrow, you actually found that the cost of media grew in a way that fast outpaced your ability to bring the CAC down. And it was in any case never close. It was an order of magnitude away from the kind of customer acquisition costs that we were able to achieve on the usual digital channels. Mm-hmm. So yeah, as I say, I've talked myself into a position where I'm much more comfortable treating this channel as something that operates best at the top of the funnel to build brand equity, live with it on its own terms, and accept that the benefits of it will be realised in the places that you usually see a conversion happening.
Look, I'll return to the audience for questions in the dying minutes of our talk, but what's your one piece of advice to a DC brand out there, maybe listening in the audience, who thinks this sounds like a great story and they'd love to be on TV, but it's TV and it's too terrifying. It's not for me as a brand.
I mean, it sounds so trite, but I mean, what I found myself, because plenty of people have asked me, right, and it's sort of relatively unusual, both in our category but also our scale in terms of investing in TV. And so when I have conversations with other founders about this, I'll find myself just imploring them to be brave, to recognise that, to acknowledge their conditioning, and to say, look, I know that if you can't measure it, it's not something that you want to manage. But that if you're prepared to take the leap of faith, eventually you will be able to measure it, and you'll probably feel pretty good about it. So yeah, I just give testimony to our own experience as a very quantitatively driven business that actually, you can put this sort of spend away and feel pretty good about it at the end of it all.
Nicely, fortune favours the bold as our theme, so perfect timing. I think we have time for a few questions. Yeah, yes, do it. Yeah, if you join, maybe if you can say your name and your company before you ask, that'd be great. Yeah, just there. Yeah. Perfect for you, Ruben.
Ruben from Thinkbox, a fantastic case study, love it. lots of brands talk about, you know, the fear that you talk about investing lots of money, and actually the vast majority, I think about 30% of brands that come onto TV are spending less than 50k, so it's really accessible. But I'd be interesting if you can share how you sort of scaled up your activity in terms of the targeting. Did you start regional and then grow into different areas, or did you sort of focus on specific audiences and then sort of build it out, that sort of growth?
Yeah, I mean, if truth be told, certainly in terms of the campaign that we've been running through Media for Equity over the last 3 years, we've been fairly consistent in terms of how we put spend away. So sort of similar levels each month that we're on, and we're on for about 8 months of the year. There are some parts of the calendar that just don't make sense for us given what we sell. So yeah, there's not been we haven't had an experience of kind of walking through graded steps of spend. And I'd also say, you know, because we've eschewed this direct response objective, it hasn't been a case. I mean, you could what we planned initially when we made the very first ads was to start slowly, drop a few depth charges, figure out where the good seams of customers were, and spend heavily against those parts of the schedules, those day parts, that programming. In the event, we didn't feel good enough about the results that we were getting from TV Squared and some of the other tools that you might use in terms of the accuracy, the attribution, to really double down on that. And when we switched to a brand objective, we've actually left ourselves doing something that feels much more kind of broad-based and less about kind of stepping through an optimization process to a high volume of scale when you've learned exactly where you belong. As I say, under this leap of faith approach, there's less of that granular optimization to be done. That doesn't mean that we haven't. I mean, to answer your question slightly more directly, we've conducted tests around regional holdouts, for example. That's something that's very easy to do on ITV. And suffice to say, those regional tests have endorsed results that we've been able to, or measurement that we've been able to do in other ways, in a way that was quite encouraging.
I think one more question. One more question. Anyone out there? Front just here. You just there. Oh, sorry, just there.
Hello. I'm Aishan Gregory from Alliance Advertising and Marketing. And I just wondered whether you'll be testing new channels before the end of the year.
Good question. I mean, I think I mentioned earlier that I thought outdoor was back on deck as something we haven't touched in 5 years. There was a moment when it was sort of quite difficult to engage with the market, especially if you were looking at stuff around commuter venues, you know, during and immediately after the pandemic. But I feel like that market settled down, and it's time for us to try outdoor again, to which we would take a very similar approach, looking at the impacts through the marketing funnel rather than obviously trying to measure anything very directly. So that's on deck. I mean, I've got nothing original to say about this, but TikTok's going very well. And while it isn't it's probably out of the gates now and not something that I describe as brand new, it's extraordinary to watch that channel grow, and frankly, quite a relief in a world where we've all been too dependent on Meta for too long. Yeah, here's hoping it doesn't get shut down at the end of the year.
Will you be testing any other TV channels?
Any other TV channels? Yeah, plenty. I mean, I don't think what's great about ITV is its raw reach. It's taking a bazooka to the problem of lack of awareness at the top of the funnel. But ultimately, if we want to reach exactly our people, there are probably some places we could go that would feel a little bit more targeted and focused. And I imagine we'll explore those channels. Sport will probably be a big feature, for example, in the next round of TV advertising.
Thanks.
I think we are up against time, so thank you so much, Ben. That's a fascinating chat. Thank you all so much. Definitely go and buy Spoke trousers. They are the best. And have a good rest of the day.
Thank you so much. Thank you.